Hey, it's Kim Meltzer, and this is the Esports Mom Podcast. And today I'm really excited to bring my friend Laura here to speak about something that means the world to me, and that is how in the hell does your brain work when you're a gamer? No, I'm just kidding. It's actually about game mindset and unlocking in esports and beyond. So let's just start with that. As funny as it is, you got to love our podcast. It's just you and me
Mhm.
having this really fun conversation that we started probably, gosh, weeks, months ago. I don't even know.
It's
It
been a
all
minute.
began when you came to the esports land experience in Arizona last year watching Rocket League for the first time with high schoolers. And I don't even know how it all came together, but you showed up to our experience in Mesa at CCS doing this esports showcase for Rocket League with the high schoolers from Arizona. And you have to explain it because then we can go from there as to why we're having this amazing conversation.
Okay, it was such a cool experience because I was invited by Sapani Tibke. She is out of Chandler Unified School District, really key in building out and supporting esports in the area, which is fantastic. And she said, "Hey, I'm going to be out at CCS doing, there's an esports competition going on." She goes, "Why don't you stop by?" And I said, "Okay." So I literally planned out like an hour. I was going to drop by. I actually had dinner plans that night. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go there for an hour and then I'll move on with my life. I didn't leave. I forgot to go to dinner with my friend. So never met her, ghosted her completely for the day. And then I actually showed back up the next day to attend the rest of the competition because it was that phenomenally engaging, powerful, and amazing of an experience. Like I don't have the adjectives because it was so cool. So I'm just gonna say it was so cool. Yeah, it was powerful, and some of the most powerful things about it, I think, were um, that the students were one, the center of the focus, which I absolutely loved, and the center of the focus in a very empowered and autonomous way. There wasn't anybody telling the kids like, "Oh, go sit over there, do this, do that." The children were treated like professionals. They were interviewed like professionals. They acted as a result as professionals, as capable, empowered, articulate human beings. And I think so much of that was due to the fact that they were treated as such. You know what I
Correct.
mean? Like, I'm not denigrating or saying anything bad about other environments in other ways. Um, and I am saying that you rise to the level of expectation that is provided for you. And so I was watching the kids work together as they were gaming. They're making flash decisions. They're, cheering each other on. They're enthusiastic. They're winning and losing with grace and and candor. Um, they are doing spotlight interviews, right? They're going and talking to the shoutcasters. I was so proud that I already knew the word shoutcaster when I
I'm
showed up.
impressed as well.
Yep, yep. They were talking to the shoutcasters, and they were able to soundbite beautifully. All of those things, and I know they had support in learning some of the skill sets that they needed in order to be able to do that, and at the same time, they were left there was an understanding and a natural acceptance that they had the power, the strength, and the ability to do what they were doing. There wasn't anybody, I'm going to say holding their hands, and I mean that in the best possible way. The supports were
Right.
there, and they were expected and understood to be competent and to have the resources within themselves, as long as the skill sets were taught to do what they needed to do. It was fantastic. Can you tell I enjoyed it?
Yeah, totally. Well, and it blew me away because you came back for the second day. So I knew
Yes.
that spoke volumes, really,
Yes. Yeah.
truthfully.
Yeah.
And the funny part is having to build it out. I didn't know any of the kids until they showed up. And so having done professional lands, my career and building out, professional players, it was really funny to get to know the parents and the players and the coaches and to be able to work with CCS as not only the production side of it, but the brand who was behind it and to use their headquarters and then to integrate all of those different stakeholders to be able to give these kids an experience to where I was teaching them the pro player side of what it would look like in high school and to watch them unfold as if they had, known it. And the only thing that they had really to their advantage was watching it online and seeing it or having had maybe a LAN experience, which most of them didn't. And then those kids with which had disabilities didn't feel any different than the kids who were athletic or came in, feeling a little bit more confident in certain areas. And it was just really a unique matchup of all of that in just a day and a half worth of experiences, right?
Yeah.
So what was most appealing was your LinkedIn post, which just really kind of segregated, not even say segregated, separated all of those different bullet points as to what you saw from an academic level and your perspective of it also from a neurological level. And that's what started this conversation. So little to say that my excitement and your excitement is even funnier because now I'm trying to like get you to come on this podcast so that we could talk about what we both love so much and can't explain to most of the world because they think we're nuts. So we'll just start with that. And in that, I want to express that like for what I asked you about, and you're going to get a little bit more in detail, is I call it the academic versus the creative.
Hmm.
You've called it something completely different, and we're trying to explain what the game, who the gamer is, because I notice in education nobody seems to know who these kids are because they have more of a creative edge than an academic edge, and that's what's made it very difficult for these kids to fit into the school environment per se.
Yeah. And I think one of the key challenges and opportunities that I love to lean into is the idea that every single person should feel, resourced and empowered to do whatever it is that they want to do or that helps them to contribute to the world, right? And I'm getting a little like, "Whoa," as I say that.
Right.
And at the level of fact, so often our learners, even our adults, are operating, mostly our learners, I'm going to focus on learners, are operating in worlds that don't necessarily support them as their holistic entire selves, right? And what I saw and what's, everybody at the CCS experience did was created and held space that was very supportive of the different ways that people, learn, think, and do.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that I find in esports is so fascinating because it is exactly doing what you're saying. It is nodding to the needs and the strengths. I'm not even going to say needs, the strengths of the more creative learner, the more creative processor, the more creative learner. And it's also doing the work of recognizing the more academic, analytic, more left brain, left hemispheric filtering type person. And so the reality is both exist in the world, and we have multiple avenues through which we receive, process, and apply information. And the challenge of this comes in for learners, I think, because our traditional education environment, and I know we're going to talk about this over like other episodes as well, so diving too deeply into this right now, um, I'll go squirrel, so pull me back when I start to go.
No worries. All
Um,
good.
but the traditional academic environment is very still, even though we've done great work, it's still very linear in the fact that it is focusing in the here's the information, we're going to provide it to you, memorize it, and then share it with us in the very specific way. So the single lane focus, right?
Right.
And that often provides a challenge to the learner that that's not their best and favorite way to learn, think, and do. And so what we see in the like esports environments and environments that really work in the more, I'm going to say right hemispheric filtering, the right hemispheric lean, the more creative side of things, is it's giving them an opportunity to recognize that they're successful as well, right?
Yep.
In an
Yep.
environment where we often um, don't give the, I'm going to go with immediate feedback, right? Keep those feedback loops tight. That's one very specific example of things that happen in gaming that isn't always possible in the way that we operate in the traditional classroom. And so feedback is so far separated from, demonstration that we don't get the opportunity for the brain to tack onto that and
Totally.
therefore repeat and embed the neural pathways that are going to create repeated success. Did I make sense the way I said that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
let me do it from this perspective. So, what I've learned in the 15 years that I've been doing video gaming and working with these pros and, the different aspects of developers and publishers, and then you've got the pro players, and then you've got the shoutcasters, and you've got all of these different pieces of this wheel that not just for video gaming as a casual player, but video gaming as a competition, right? So having met autistic kids, having met kids with disabilities, having met like athletes who love gaming, the challenge of someone that's going through school and is getting all A's, but then comes into gaming and has it having to separate their perspective of going, like you were talking, right brain versus left brain hemispheres. Well, if you've got a left brain thinker who is more of the academic, A plus B equals C, right? You've got an engineer or someone who has to know that if I'm going to take a test, I can't really problem solve. I just have to memorize, right? So they're going to learn very much black and white, and they're stuck in that world, and then they love that world because it's not a whole lot of solution to that. It's you're being taught what to know, you have to learn that information, and then from there you have to decide what to do with it. The creative mind is on the opposite side, the right hemisphere, right? And it's saying, well, I don't know the educational side, but I'm going to go in face first and I'm going to figure it out as I go along. But I don't know that A plus B equals C. I'm just over in like L, and I'm going to go backwards and forward till I figure out what makes sense because I'm a problem solver or I'm a creative thinker. And the way I used to explain it simply was, and I'm sorry I don't have the analogy in physical form, but I have one, and that is I always tell people to learn the box before you can think outside of it. Right? So the academic level is the box. You're learning the structure, the boundaries, the things that create that understanding of what it is you're learning. But the thinking person who's a creative is already outside of the box, doesn't even necessarily know the box, and is scrounging around trying to figure it out. And video games are kind of like that. You can kind of get to know somewhat of a structure of a video game, but 9 times out of 10, the creative kid is figuring a way to be physically, emotionally, and mentally able to maneuver at every aspect of their thinking to be able to solve the problem, and allows them to get to the end result. Whereas again, the academic person can do that too, but if you look at both sides of it, this brain side on your left side is saying A plus B equals C, and the guy on the other side is saying, I don't even know what A and B is, let alone C, but I'm just going to go in face first and figure it out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it 72 times until I master it. And then I'm going to get to know the box a little bit because the structure's sort of there to figure out that, oh, if that's a wall, I can't go through a wall, so I must go around a wall, right? And
Yes.
that's the weird part of this. And quite honestly, Laura, what blew me away is when I went to India, was when I really understood something that I hadn't truly gotten face first. And that was my college kids that I got to work with in Valorant. So again, these are college kids who came to compete in a Valorant competition that we put on in India. And one of the kids, while we were setting up for the production, they had introduced me and they said to them, hey, this is Esports mom, do you guys have any questions for her? And I remember this one guy, college age, and he said to me, I don't know how to give my time properly to school and to gaming. And that hit me hard, and I thought, this is a guy who has both sides of his brain functioning, and he doesn't know how to separate the left hemisphere from the right hemisphere. So when he's academic, he's got to focus on A plus B equals C. But then when he went into the gaming side, he's free of that, and he's allowed to just kind of like be silly and do whatever he wants. And it's a completely different side of his brain that's allowing him to do that. So he couldn't figure out how to focus from one side to the other. And I thought, wow, there are a lot of different things going on. There is the academic child who's truly academic, and then there's the creative who's truly creative, but then there's the kids who fit in both worlds and they don't know how to work in their brain,
Yeah.
and they're stuck because
And
they don't know where to focus because
and
one's turning on and one's turning off. And I thought, this is why I got excited to talk to you, because who's teaching these kids in their world of thinking and learning? And that's what we wanted to talk about today, is like, this is what the problem is. You go to school and you're not academic. How do you fit into a module of thinking that isn't how you're wired? And then you've got the other kids who are academic who are like, this is easy, and then you put them into a creative perspective and they're like, ooh, that's way too much like freedom and I don't know how to handle it. And then you got the kids in between, right?
yes, and you've got discomfort along the way and senses of failure at one, uh, on all sides to a degree, and then an avoidance of risk because we don't like being uncomfortable, right?
No,
And so
no.
if you are a more traditional, we're going to say traditional, I'm air quoting
Yes.
traditional, a more traditional learner where you're very comfortable in the, you know, standardized classroom where you're getting, the information and you take the multiple choice test, maybe you do an essay, maybe you do something a little more dynamic where you do like an audio response or a video or any of those things. the focus is still on let's share the information in a very specific way. And so you can feel successful there. And that's fantastic because we want everybody to feel successful because those are going to carve those neural pathways that make us, really feel good about ourselves and want to repeat the experience, right? And then we have the kiddos who, just thinking in the classroom, who that's not their natural bent. That's not how they, you know, represent themselves the best. And so they may not get the opportunities. And, it's kind of like trying to force somebody to write with their left hand when they're right-handed. We're
Correct.
automatically putting a limiter in place. Um, Whereas when they get into opportunities where they can, feel a little more dynamic, be a little more, look at the big picture and then get to the details, they thrive, right? And so the gaming
Correct.
environment provides that opportunity for them, and that's fantastic. And the reality is everybody's both. Everybody, people might have a lean, have a preference, and that's where they're going to want to spend their time because that's where they feel safe, warm, fuzzy, and comfortable, right? And for success in the world, we need both, right? And so, like
Totally.
you're saying, like where are the kids? Where are the adults? Not just the kids, learning the basic fundamentals of the fact that the brain, the organ inside your head, just like your heart, just like your lungs, it's driving so many experiences that we're having and we don't even know it. Just like we don't know that our lungs are doing their job. You know what I mean? Just
Correct.
like we don't notice that our heart's beating, but it's continuing to do so all the time. Our brain is processing so much information and is a huge user of the resources in our body every day, up to 20% of the glucose, for example, um, that our body has available is taken up by the brain. So what the brain really likes to do is stick with the familiar, stick with the pattern, stick with what's known. And so we've had success in X, we're going to want to continue X, and we're going to try to avoid situations where we have, Y happen or whatever. But then we get out into the real world and we need that creativity, right? We need to be able
Yep.
to think on the fly. And maybe those skill sets aren't as developed because we've spent our time in a more structured space where we're given the inside of the box before the outside, right? So you think about something like, you get out into the real world and you want to buy a house. Like, you're going for a
Right.
home purchase or new car purchase, any, larger purchase, bigger picture thing like that. One person might begin with the end in mind where they think about this is the house I want, this is what I really love, and then others will begin with, well, what can I afford? What exactly is available to me? And both are valuable and useful and both are necessary. People are going to approach them differently. And then I want to go in six different directions on this, but one is to know that that also creates conflict because if you're
Right.
not recognizing that this is just a way that we process information that might be different, we see each other differently. Like, I'm a very big picture thinker. I start big picture and then I go to the details, right? I have, other people in my life who start with the details and go big picture. If we don't understand that about each other, there can be conflict, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it could be you don't
Absolutely.
understand me, you don't care, you don't want to go on vacation, whatever it is. And then the big
Right.
picture thinker can be seen as irresponsible, right? Because all you're
Oh,
thinking
totally.
about is wanting to be on the beach. Well, my brain works that way. I need to or benefit from picturing being on the beach before I go back into the details where, it doesn't mean I'm going to ignore the details. It doesn't give me, you know, tacit permission to avoid the fact that I need to think about the details, but it gives a sense of understanding and an opportunity for grace and collaboration that if we
Totally.
don't have that understanding doesn't exist. So that's, kind of one rabbit hole I just went down. Looking at our students, if they don't understand these things about themselves, we are disempowering them because they are set up to feel like they're failing, right?
Exactly.
In one
Exactly.
of the two capacities. And like I said before, circling back, they're going to be less inclined to be willing to take risks and step into areas where they may not be comfortable, and that doesn't even cover or begin to touch on the fact that the real world, that we work in, the everyday world, recognizes both, right? Where the
Right.
academic
Right.
environment doesn't necessarily. Should I stop
Well,
talking for a second and then
no,
I'll
no, you're
talk about?
fine, but I'll
Yeah,
I'll go back to our land. Let's go back to our land. So
yeah,
what I do and why I'm so successful at it is not because I'm great or anything. It's the fact that I've been given an emotional intelligence for my gift. I have an intuition but I also understand the psychology of humans. So what I do is I assess each of these kids to where they're at. I know what comfort looks like. I know how to build comfort, and
Yeah.
then I accentuate everyone's specific needs, and I kind of work together to figure out, are they a creative or they are an academic? What are their skill sets? What are their uncomfortable areas, right? Like to a child who's autistic, I'll just use I had a pro player named Classics who was autistic, and he played Rocket League in the beginning, and he was phenomenal. And his dad, I remember his dad coming to me and saying, my son's got autism, and he's very black and white, and he kind of gave me the breakdown, and I said, okay, no problem. And his dad tried to like jump in, and I said, let him be, let's see how he does, and we'll kind of grow with him. Well, Classics had to have pizza. Didn't matter where we were in the world, but Classic had to have pizza because he felt that that was his superpower, right? And we laughed. We're in Amsterdam looking at him, and I'm like, Classics, I don't know if I can get you pizza, but dude,
Sure,
if
we
I can
can
get
make
you
this.
pizza, I'm all over it. And of course, we found him pizza by the grace of God in Amsterdam, and we hooked him up. But when you start to get to know these kids at a deeper level, you almost want to give them Myers-Briggs or something like that that allows them to find out who they are. Because at the end of the day, the educator's the one that gets stuck. The parent's the one that gets stuck. Because if you're an academic parent and your child is a creative child, you're like oil and water. Like there's no connection. Or vice versa. You're a creative parent and you have an academic child. We've got some issues, right? Something that doesn't connect because you're thinking, like you said, perspective. You might see blue and I might see a light blue, but we're still seeing blue, right? It's how do you communicate that effectively? And this is where the kids get to be in a failure mode, is that if I don't meet them and connect with them and ask them the right questions and find out who they are, they feel like they failed. I always give them the opportunity to grow at their level, to be able to be at the same level as somebody who's doing the exact opposite of what they think or are thinking differently. So when you were at the LAN, my goal was to get each team to kind of show me or showcase who they were, both individually and as a team, to be able to then figure out the coach and then work with the shoutcasters to be able to point out what things these guys needed to be able to do the best that they could, to train them at their level of understanding. So in a very short hour, I was able to engage each of them and say, okay, here's what the agenda looks like, and this is what I'm going to need from you. Now, you may have never done an interview like you've seen on the, on lands, but we're going to do this with you. There's no right or wrong. Let them ask you questions. Give me the best answer. If you can't feel like you have an answer, let's talk through it and we'll help you to design what that could look like. And we taught them a little bit about PR and a little bit about media and a little bit about interaction and communication and getting to know themselves and being able to be proud of who they were, whether they were a super athlete or quote nerdy video gamer, right? It didn't matter because we didn't put any kind of stipulation or stereotype to them. It didn't matter if they were ethically a different color or they were a different religion, or none of that matters in video gaming. We don't look at that. We look at the person, and then we find out who they are, and then all of that comes out in the story of who they are, right?
Yeah.
So they get to really shine and find out who they are with no failure. And they can fail, but they really don't fail because we get to teach them who they are in the process of being able to use video games as a vehicle. That's what you saw was a success of that in a high school level, not even a pro level, but a
Right.
high school level where you've got kids that are freshmen who are just barely getting out of junior high school and starting this journey. And then you've got the senior who's like all ready to graduate and think about either college career or pro status. And that's what was so intriguing to me, to have done this for 15 years and done it so well and so deeply. But your perspective was just such a gift to me because I've tried for so many years to try to help the school side of things to understand the students that they have in front of them. And that's what's been the disconnect.
Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed, not first, but one of the things that fascinated me was when the kiddos were talking to the shoutcasters. Kiddos, when the athletes, I'm not going to call them kiddos, that's,
Well, to us, they're
disrespect.
kiddos because
They
we're
are
old, but
kiddos,
that's
right?
another
But,
story.
when the athletes were talking with the shoutcasters, and the fact that they were able to articulately soundbite and communicate, and they did it like they've been doing it for years, you know what I mean? And to know that they only had, a slight amount of training on that was fascinating. And now, as we've talked more, and I've understood, more, and I've understood the work that you've done in the background, not necessarily with that, but creating this safe space for them. So there's this concept that I teach called brain safe. And it's the idea that in order to learn anything, the brain needs to feel four things: secure, aligned, familiar, and empowered, right? And as you talk about it, one of the first things that you said you do is you create an environment of safety where the students feel literally secure. They feel welcomed in the space. They feel included and valued. And so that's the first thing, right? Our brain looks for, right? Back when we didn't want to get kicked out of the cave, right? Do we feel secure? Do we feel valued? Do we feel like we
Hmm.
matter? Does our presence matter? And you make sure that happens. And then when you talk about, we talk about alignment, like, is what we expect to have happen in alignment with what's really happening? Like you talked about pizza, right? That is providing a student with alignment, also familiarity, but with alignment with what they're expecting, right? So when they come into the environment, they expect to have access to the gaming equipment. They expect to, be treated with respect. They expect these things. And so we make sure that you make sure that the environments are aligned, and then familiar as well. Right? You do everything you can to provide them with the creature comforts that they're familiar with in order to replicate their environment. And so, like I talk about, like when you travel, bring your favorite hoodie. Don't take all new clothes. You know what I
Right.
mean? Take something
Right.
like for when you're back in your hotel room that you can just cozy up in. Take your, use the extra space to pack your favorite slippers, because that's not only comfort, it's also helping your brain to feel safe. And then empowered, you're working to empower these students in these small bites at the level at which they are ready and is appropriate to their readiness and their role. Like you're
Right.
looking at a freshman may not have the level of readiness a senior does, and so you're not going to empower them necessarily in the same way. But when
Correct.
we empower students or learners or whoever, anyone, you know, at a level to which they're not ready or which isn't appropriate to their role, it confuses them. We're not going to give
Right.
a kindergartner the keys to the car, right?
No.
Because
No.
that's not appropriate to their readiness or their role in the world, right? May we give them, the opportunity to open the door themselves? Sure. You know what I mean? But anyway, so what I watched you do with that and I saw the result of and learned the back end of it later. I was like, oh my gosh, she made these kids feel brain safe. Absolutely. And then the third thing in that is one of the things we sometimes forget is that kids are always watching,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And they are picking up on how we respond to them. Even as teenagers, when we seem like we're like trees, trees in the room, they're not paying any attention to us. Their mirror neurons are picking up on the subtlest shift in our expression on our face, right?
Yep.
The look away that we didn't mean, that didn't have anything to do with them, right? And so they are constantly scanning. They're in such a heightened state for the most part, 99% of them, I'd say, are at a heightened state of awareness of what's going on around them, because that's a stage of life where social acceptance is so key. And
Totally.
when we get the kiddos who are, the students who are late athletes, dang it. I'm going to say kiddo student athlete. I'm going to say it again and again. But,
Covers everybody.
it covers everybody. But when they're, looking at gaming at this point, esports isn't allocated the same um, cachet or whatever as some other sports, that type of thing. And so, students who are like constantly, looking for social validation, social acceptance, they they were treated like rock stars at your event. And so they got to experience this is what it looks like. And the reality that the skill sets they have are the ones that are, and that they're building are the ones that are really, really needed in the real world is, oh, it was like a
No,
chef's
I
kitchen experience,
appreciate
kiss
that.
experience. Yeah.
Well, and let me add one more piece that I think is even more important too, and that is I actually talked to them in the beginning about winning versus losing, anger versus excitement. I talked to them about the
Yeah.
reality of their psychological experience, and I also try to set that up as a opportunity to learn beyond just high school. One of the things that is so detrimental to me, and I got to do it in India, going back to my India experience, I had college kids who came in. Some parents didn't even know they were there. There was a lot of interesting things that I had to learn from that culture. But one thing that was really interesting is sitting down with them for about an hour and saying to them, "Here's what it's going to look like in the week ahead." And I literally took them day by day, moment by moment, of some of the things that they were going to experience and what that meant in those moments. There's going to be moments that the internet's going to go down and you're going to lose your game. There's going to be times where you're going to win and you're going to think you're bigger than the world. There's going to be times that you lose and you just want to crawl in a space. There's going to be times that you hate your team. There's going to be times that you love your team. There are going to be times that your friends are going to be there for you, and there will be times when you just want to like not have friends at all. And like I would go through each and every emotion and moment so that by the time we got to the end, I asked all of them at the end. I had 16 colleges with five students per team, right? So there's a lot of them, and each team had to go through their own processes to get to the end, both individually and team. And I even did it at the LAN was, here's what it's going to look like. Here's what you're going to go through, and here's what we're going to expect from you. And I'm not going to take a no. You need to explain to me why you're having an issue, right? And how to communicate, how to develop these moments. I said, you're going to have a day where you're going to have a job and you're not going to like your boss, but does that mean that you quit? Or does that mean you learn something from the experience or you find out more about yourself? Like I go through all of those dimensions in each and every aspect of when I'm running either pros or high school or college. I literally sit them down and walk them through the real practical side of what this means, not just esports, but life in general. So they're life tools in a sense, because nobody sits down with them and gives them kind of like a roadmap. And that's been something that helps. So what you saw was a very quick roadmap to these kids who found out very quickly how to enable and empower themselves to be able to have moments of success and moments of failure, but how to use their brain power to be like you told us about rewiring, like, hey, if this doesn't work and you feel like a failure, what do we need to do to like look at it differently, right? And that's where you help me in these future podcasts where we're going to talk about brain wiring and
Mhm.
how we look at the perspective of things and the tool set that it takes to teach a right brain from a left brain, from an educator to a parent, and how all of this will work in learning to communicate effectively, not just in our own conversations to ourselves, but also to each other.
Yes.
And
Right.
then when you're talking about problem solving, because you're an academic and I might be creative and we think differently, we still have the same common ground. We just got to look at it and understand the other person's perspective.
Ah, yes, that's so key, right? And that will solve that alone, that understanding saves so many conflicts, so many things from breaking into a fight where they could have been a real challenge. And it allows us to synergize, right? Because
Yep.
I know my areas where I'm less strong. And so instead of looking at it through only my lens, if I know this isn't my area of strength, I can bring somebody in and partner with somebody who is strong in that area. And where if we don't understand that we're processing differently, we're going to fight. Instead, we could go, oh, we're going to celebrate the fact that you're big picture right now. And now we're going to focus on the details. So, we're going to
Totally.
celebrate the fact that I am more into the details. And
Totally.
I think again it comes back to so much, and what I'm so excited about this is one that once you understand these concepts, which they're quick and easy to understand. It's kind of like I always talk about the backhoe effect. It's kind of funny, like well, if you don't know what a backhoe is, you never see one, but as soon as you know what a backhoe is, they're everywhere. It's kind of like or like when you buy
Oh
a
yeah.
new car, all of a sudden you
Right.
notice your car everywhere. Until you can see it, you can't it's harder to recognize it and do something, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And
No.
so, once people start to, every time I teach this concept or talk about it, I'll have somebody come back to me and be like, oh my gosh, I never understood that my, son, my daughter, my partner, my colleague, whatever, this is how they're thinking. They're
Totally.
not just being a jerk. This
No,
is
totally.
legit. Yeah, legit. This is how they think differently. And the fact is, it doesn't take extra time. It's not adding anything to your plate. It's actually, once we understand these concepts, it's actually taking things off your plate because things that you worry, stress, or fret about are no longer a concern. And
No,
that's
because
what's so cool, right?
education is key on both sides, and that's the
Yes.
difference. Very
Yeah.
much the difference, right? And that's
Yeah.
where even learning at the end of the LAN and we gave each team there a prize of some sort. Now it wasn't, everybody won. That was not the key at all. There was a first place winner and a second place winner, and then there was third, fourth, and fifth. And we made sure first place literally got the key prize of the gaming chair, and they got the Oakley glasses, and they got all the little key things that were part of the experience, the headsets. And then we realized, well, you know what, those kids also worked hard, and we want them to have the same kind of capability to play equal down the road. So we
Yeah.
gave them, Oakley glasses and headsets because we knew those were actual pieces of equipment that they could use that would better their gaming. So not everybody won, but there were the opportunity to get the first place winners to win, and everybody else kind of was second up and third up and fourth and fifth, and they didn't win. And yes, it was disappointing for them not to get first place, but they still saw the value that they weren't losers just because they didn't win the first prize. And that was part of the high school experience. Once you get into college and more into the larger side of life, it's a little bit easier to kind of sort out, first place from winning to losing, and how to, really understand that, just because you lost doesn't mean you take your life, or you break up with your girlfriend, or you hate your parents, or, you hate school. Like, we have to really like decipher those commitments of how do you get them to think a bit differently. And so now with this first episode here, I want to be able to transition and just say that we'll stop here on this part of our conversation,
Such a good
and that I would
conversation.
love, as we move on to the second podcast, that we're going to talk about the left versus right brain, the science of play versus learning. We want to kind of like adjust now into this next phase, and I
Yeah.
hope that people will continue this conversation with us. And we also want to make sure, and I think you can help me more or less, is I'll say to the parents, please, please, please take the time to learn these podcasts, because it will make an impact on your relationship with your kids, regardless of whether they're male or female. It doesn't matter. That has a whole different concept, from male hormones to female hormones, and we can get into that in another podcast in itself. But from the parent side, and I think for you, what would you want to say to the educator that is listening?
I would say to the educator, and I would say to the parent, anybody who's human, right? Human working in the
Right.
world, is the ideas of each of the next sessions are going to be they're conceptual, yes, and there's actionable tools and takeaways that you're going to be able to use right away and implement and see the impact of right away in each one of those sessions. So today we've been talking big picture, we've been talking ideas and concepts, which is great. We need the foundation, right? And that's how the real world works. We get a foundation piece and then we get the information and the tools as they become necessary, needed, and then we create this toolkit that we hold on to so we can replicate and pull out the tools that we need when we need them. So for each of the next sessions, we're going to make sure that you have a walk tool that you're going to walk away with, that you're going to be able to apply. So we're not just talk, we're action. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. That's the goal. And maybe if there's a way, we could probably put together maybe a small booklet or something
Yeah,
that you may be able to um, get out to people who are interested to learn more. And then if they want to connect, we'll have to figure out the best way to do
100%.
that, because I'm sure there's a lot of interesting conversations yet to be had. So
Yeah.
we'll stop here for our first experience, which I think was so much fun and awesome.
Mhm.
And I appreciate you. And I look forward to the next few podcasts. But for now, we'll close the experience, being able to talk about how fun it was in Arizona. And I'm grateful to you for the opportunity to get this started.
Oh, thank you
So,
for allowing me to be a part of it. I am absolutely thrilled, and I'm looking forward to the next episodes and all the fun we're going to have in the future. So, yeah.
absolutely.